The wolves surrounded her car before she even realized the road had gone quiet. Tessa Thornton gripped the steering wheel, her breath forming white clouds in the frigid air that seeped through the broken heater vents. She'd been stupid to take the mountain pass this late in February. Stupider still to ignore the low fuel warning until it was too late. Now her sedan sat dead on the frozen asphalt, miles from the nearest town, and the pack that had emerged from the tree line was circling with an intelligence that made her skin crawl. These weren't ordinary wolves. They were too large, too coordinated, their eyes catching the moonlight with an amber glow that spoke of something fundamentally wrong. Tessa had grown up in Montana, had seen wolves from a distance during camping trips with her father. These creatures moved differently, purposefully, like soldiers executing a formation. She fumbled for her phone. No signal. Of course there wasn't. The mountains devoured cell reception like they devoured unwary travelers. One of the wolves, a massive gray beast with scars crisscrossing its muzzle, approached the driver's side door. It placed one enormous paw on the ice-slicked road and tilted its head, studying her through the window. Tessa's heart hammered against her ribs. The creature's lips pulled back, revealing teeth longer than her fingers. She had two choices: stay in the car and hope they lost interest, or make a run for it. Neither option filled her with confidence, but at least the car provided a barrier, however fragile. The temperature inside had already dropped to near freezing. Another hour and hypothermia would claim her before the wolves did. The scarred wolf suddenly lunged at the window. Tessa screamed, throwing herself across the center console as the glass spider webbed under the impact. The beast hit it again, and this time the window shattered inward, spraying her with crystalline fragments. She scrambled for the passenger door, her fingers numb and clumsy. Behind her, the wolf was forcing its massive head through the broken window, jaws snapping inches from her legs. Tessa slammed her shoulder against the passenger door and tumbled out onto the frozen road. The cold hit her like a physical blow. She'd left her heavy coat in the trunk, wore only a thin sweater and jeans. The wind cut through the fabric as if it didn't exist. But there was no time to register discomfort because the wolves were there, forming a tightening circle around her. She counted 7 of them. 7 massive predators with steam rising from their nostrils and hunger in their eyes. The scarred leader had extracted itself from her car and was stalking toward her with deliberate slowness. Savoring the hunt, Tessa backed away, her boots sliding on black ice. Her mind raced through everything she knew about wolf encounters. Make yourself big, make noise, don't run. But these rules felt inadequate against creatures that seemed to understand strategy, that coordinated like a trained unit. "Get back," she shouted, her voice cracking. "Go on, hey, get!" The wolves didn't even pause. If anything, they seemed amused by her defiance. The circle contracted another foot. Tessa's back hit something solid, the guardrail. Beyond it, the mountain dropped away into darkness. She could hear rushing water far below, a river not yet frozen despite the season. Jump or be torn apart, some choice. The scarred wolf gathered itself to spring. Then the air changed. It wasn't something Tessa could see at first, more a sensation, a pressure that made her ears pop and her breath catch. The temperature, already brutal, seemed to plummet another 20 degrees in the span of a heartbeat. Frost spread across the asphalt in intricate patterns, and the wolves stopped, their heads swiveling in unison toward the road behind her. A figure stood in the middle of the frozen highway. One moment the road had been empty, and the next he was simply there as if he'd materialized from the shadows themselves. Tessa's mind struggled to process what she was seeing. The man, if he was a man, stood well over 6 feet tall, his frame lean and powerful beneath a long black coat that didn't move despite the howling wind. His hair fell past his shoulders in a cascade of pure white, startling against the darkness. Even from 30 feet away, his skin appeared colorless, alabaster in the moonlight. But it was his eyes that froze Tessa more thoroughly than the winter wind. They were the color of fresh blood, and they were fixed on the wolf pack with an intensity that radiated violence. "Leave," he said, and his voice carried effortlessly across the wind, rich and cold and absolutely without mercy. "This human is not yours to hunt." The scarred wolf's hackles rose. It released a growl that Tessa felt in her bones. The pack shifted, and she realized with dawning horror that they weren't retreating. They were preparing to attack this stranger. The white-haired man tilted his head, and something flickered across his aristocratic features. Not fear, anticipation. "I gave you a chance to survive this night. You should have taken it." 3 wolves launched themselves at him simultaneously, moving with that unnatural speed that marked them as something more than ordinary predators. The stranger didn't move until they were nearly upon him. Then he was a blur. Tessa's eyes couldn't track the motion. One instant, the wolves were in mid-leap. The next, the stranger stood among them, his hand buried in the scarred leader's chest. The great beast let out a truncated yelp before the man withdrew his hand and let the body drop, steam rising from the massive wound. The other two wolves crashed to the ground where their target had been moments before. They scrambled to reorient, but the stranger was already moving. He caught one by the throat and Tessa heard bones snap. The third wolf managed to sink its teeth into his arm, but he didn't even flinch. With his free hand he grasped the creature's skull and twisted. The sound made Tessa's stomach turn. The remaining 4 wolves broke ranks and fled, vanishing into the forest with their tails low. The entire encounter had lasted perhaps 15 seconds. Silence fell across the frozen road, broken only by Tessa's ragged breathing and the whistle of the wind. The stranger stood motionless, his coat splattered with dark blood that looked black in the moonlight. Then he turned toward her, and those crimson eyes pinned her in place more effectively than any wolf pack could have. He was beautiful. The thought came unbidden, inappropriate given the violence she'd just witnessed, but undeniable. His features were sharp and perfect, too perfect, like a sculptor's idealized vision of masculine beauty. Ageless, timeless, and utterly inhuman. "You're injured," he said, his gaze dropping to her hands. Tessa looked down and realized blood was dripping from her palms where she'd cut them on the broken glass. She hadn't even felt it through the adrenaline and cold. "I'm fine," she managed, though her teeth were chattering so hard she could barely form the words. "Thank you for helping me." He moved toward her, and she couldn't help but press back against the guardrail. His expression shifted, something almost like disappointment crossing his face. "You're freezing. You won't last another hour out here." He shrugged out of his coat and held it toward her. "Take it." "You'll freeze," Tessa protested automatically. His lips curved, not quite a smile. "I don't feel the cold." She accepted the coat with trembling hands, and the moment she pulled it around her shoulders, warmth enveloped her. Impossible warmth, as if the fabric itself generated heat. It smelled of winter and something darker, richer old books and expensive wine. "What were those things?" she asked. "They weren't normal wolves, no. They were shifters, tracking someone through these mountains. They found you instead." He glanced at her ruined car. "Your vehicle won't run again. The nearest town is 18 miles south. You won't make it on foot." Tessa wanted to argue, but her body was already shutting down from cold and shock. Her legs felt like lead and the warmth from the coat was making her drowsy, her adrenaline finally crashing. "I have to try. I can't just stay here." "You won't." The stranger stepped closer, and before Tessa could process his intention, he swept her into his arms as if she weighed nothing. One arm beneath her knees, the other supporting her back, holding her against his chest with casual strength. "Wait, what are you?" "Hold on," he said, and then the world lurched. They were moving, but nothing in Tessa's experience could have prepared her for this. The stranger ran with a speed that defied physics, the frozen landscape blurring into streaks of white and black. The wind should have torn her from his grip, but his hold was absolute, steady despite the impossible velocity. She buried her face against his shoulder, her stomach in freefall. It could have been seconds or minutes, her sense of time shattered completely. When the motion finally stopped, Tessa lifted her head to find they were no longer on the mountain road. They stood before an enormous iron gate set into a stone wall that stretched in both directions, vanishing into manicured evergreen hedges. Beyond the gate, a mansion rose against the night sky, all Gothic spires and elegant stonework, its windows blazing with golden light. Where Tessa's voice came out as a whisper. "Somewhere safe." The stranger carried her through the gate, which swung open at their approach, though no one had touched it. "Somewhere you can recover." The mansion's front doors opened as they climbed the wide stone steps, revealing an entrance hall that belonged in a European palace. Vaulted ceilings soared overhead, supported by marble columns. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light across polished floors and tapestries that looked centuries old. A grand staircase swept upward, its banister carved from dark wood. 2 figures waited in the hall, both dressed in formal attire that seemed period rather than costume. A woman with white hair twisted into an intricate updo, her skin the same alabaster as the stranger who held Tessa, and a man similarly pale with silver hair cut short and features that could have graced ancient coins. "Vladislav," the woman said, her accent Eastern European elegant. "You brought a human here." So he had a name. Vladislav. It suited him, old world and dignified. "She was being hunted by the wolf pack," Vladislav replied, his tone brooking no argument. "They killed her vehicle on the mountain pass. She would have died from exposure." The silver-haired man studied Tessa with eyes the color of amber. The wolves were searching for the escaped blood servant. They must have mistaken her scent. "A fortunate mistake," Vladislav said dryly. "For her, if not for them." He carried Tessa through an arched doorway into what appeared to be a library, all leather furniture and floor-to-ceiling bookshelves. A fire roared in a massive stone fireplace, filling the room with blessed heat. Vladislav settled her gently onto a velvet sofa near the fire before stepping back. "Rest here. Katerina will tend your wounds." The white-haired woman had followed them into the library. She approached Tessa with measured grace, producing a first aid kit from a side table with practiced efficiency. "Give me your hands, child." Tessa extended her cut palms, still trying to make sense of everything. "Where am I? What is this place?" "You're in the Carpathia state," Katerina said, cleaning the cuts with antiseptic that stung. "A holding of considerable age and importance, and you are remarkably lucky to be alive." The silver-haired man appeared in the doorway. "Vladislav, the council will want an explanation. You've brought a human into the primary residence during conclave. There will be questions. Then they can ask them." Vladislav stood with his back to the fire, his arms crossed, looking every inch the aristocrat despite the blood on his clothes. "I wasn't going to leave her to die." "No one's suggesting you should have," the man said patiently. "But protocol exists for reasons. A human in the estate, one who's seen us use our abilities, will be given the choice," Vladislav interrupted. "As the law requires. But not tonight. Tonight she recovers." Tessa's head was spinning. "Choice? What choice? And what do you mean, conclave? What are you people?" The three pale-skinned strangers exchanged glances. Finally, Vladislav moved to crouch before the sofa, bringing his crimson eyes level with hers. Up close, Tessa could see that his pupils were slightly elongated, almost reptilian, definitely not human. "My name is Vladislav Dragan," he said quietly. "I am what your legends call a vampire, king of the North American territories, and current host of the Vampire Conclave. This estate serves as neutral ground where the old families gather to settle disputes and maintain the peace between our kind and humanity." Tessa's laugh came out brittle, hysterical. "Vampires? You're telling me vampires are real?" "We prefer the term Nosferatu or the Nightborn, but yes, essentially." Katerina finished bandaging Tessa's hands. "We are very real, and we've lived alongside humanity since before recorded history. We simply prefer discretion." "The wolves," Tessa said slowly, her mind making connections. "The man said they were shifters." "Werewolves?" A vulgar term, but accurate enough. The silver-haired man stepped into the room properly. "I am Lucien Severin, Vladislav's second and advisor. The creatures you encountered were rogue shifters, violating territorial boundaries. They were hunting an escaped prisoner, a human who'd been illegally bound into servitude by a corrupt vampire lord. We've been tracking the perpetrator for weeks," Vladislav added. "He fled into the mountains when we closed in. His wolves scattered when their master was captured. The pack you encountered was likely trying to find their way back to whatever hole they crawled from." Tessa pulled his coat tighter around herself, even though the fire was warming her adequately now. None of this should be real, but the bandages on her hands were real. The ache in her muscles from being hurled around in her car was real, and the memory of Vladislav tearing through the wolf pack with inhuman speed was burned into her retinas. "You said something about a choice," she said. Vladislav nodded. "By law, humans who discover our existence must choose. Join us, submit to having their memories altered," or he paused, "or be eliminated if they pose a significant threat. But the latter is only invoked in extreme circumstances, and you're clearly an innocent bystander." "Memory alteration," Tessa repeated. "You mean you'd make me forget all this?" "Not painfully," Katerina assured her. "It's quite gentle, actually. You'd simply remember having car trouble and being rescued by a kind stranger who drove you to the nearest town. Everything else would fade like a dream." The thought of losing tonight, of having these hours simply erased, sent a chill through Tessa that had nothing to do with the cold. "And if I choose to join you, what does that mean?" "It means you'd be brought into our world fully," Lucien said. "Educated in our ways, our laws, given protections and a place within our society. Eventually, if you wished it, you could petition to be turned, to become one of us. But that's not required," Vladislav interjected quickly. "Many humans live among us for years, sometimes their whole natural lives, without seeking transformation. They serve as liaisons, historians, daylight agents, valuable members of our society." Tessa's gaze fixed on him. "You're the king. You could just order them to let me remember, couldn't you?" Something flickered in those blood-red eyes. "Respect? Perhaps. I could, but I won't circumvent the law even for an exceptional circumstance. The choice must be yours, made freely and with understanding of the consequences." "How long do I have to decide?" "You're exhausted and traumatized," Vladislav said. "You have until you're recovered enough to think clearly. At least a few days." "This isn't a decision to be rushed." Katerina rose. "I'll show you to a guest room. You need proper rest, a hot meal and clean clothes. Everything else can wait." Tessa let herself be led from the library, through hallways lined with artwork that looked museum-worthy, up the grand staircase to the second floor. The room Katerina opened had clearly been prepared for royalty, a four-poster bed with velvet curtains, antique furniture, windows draped in heavy silk. A connecting door revealed a bathroom with a clawfoot tub and modern fixtures that somehow didn't clash with the historical aesthetic. "There are clothes in the wardrobe that should fit," Katerina said. "I'll have food sent up within the hour. Try to rest, Tessa Thornton. You're safe here, safer than you've perhaps ever been." She swept out before Tessa could ask how she knew her full name. Then again her driver's license had been in the car. They'd probably retrieved her belongings. Alone, Tessa moved to the window and pulled back the curtain. The ground stretched out below, lit by lanterns along winding paths. In the distance she could see the wall and the iron gate. Beyond that, forest and mountains and the frozen road where her ordinary life had ended. She should be terrified. She should be demanding they let her leave, call the police, something. But instead she felt oddly calm. Maybe it was shock. Or maybe it was the memory of being held in Vladislav's arms, feeling utterly secure despite the impossible speed, despite the danger. He'd killed to protect her without hesitation, then shown her gentleness. A vampire king. The absurdity of it threatened to overwhelm her again, but Tessa pushed it down. She'd process later. For now she needed exactly what Katerina had prescribed: food, a bath, and sleep. Tomorrow she could wrestle with impossible choices. The food arrived carried by a young woman with the same pale skin and ageless quality as the others, though her eyes were violet rather than red or amber. She set a tray on the bedside table: soup, bread, cheese, fruit, and wine, and left without speaking. Tessa ate mechanically, tasting nothing, her mind too full of wolves and vampires and crimson eyes. The bath helped. She soaked until her fingers pruned, letting the hot water leach the cold from her bones and the fear from her muscles. The clothes in the wardrobe did fit surprisingly well: soft nightgowns and casual dresses, sweaters and pants in modern styles. Someone had gone to considerable trouble to prepare for unexpected guests. Tessa fell into the four-poster bed and expected to lie awake for hours, her mind racing. Instead she dropped into sleep like a stone into deep water, dreamless and absolute. She woke to sunlight streaming through the windows and sat bolt upright, disoriented. How could there be sun if the house was full of vampires? Then she remembered they'd sleep during the day, wouldn't they? Vulnerable to sunlight according to every legend she'd ever heard. A soft knock preceded the door opening. A different woman this time, dark-haired and human-looking, carrying a breakfast tray. "Good morning, Miss Thornton. I'm Elena, one of the day's staff. I hope you slept well." "Day staff," Tessa repeated. "You're human." "I am. I've worked for the Carpathian estate for 5 years now." Elena set the tray across Tessa's lap: eggs, toast, fresh fruit, coffee that smelled like heaven. "It's a good position, well compensated, and I've never been treated with anything but respect." "Do you know what they are? The vampires?" "Of course. I chose to join their world, as you might. It's been the best decision of my life." Elena moved to open the curtains fully. "Lord Vladislav left instructions that you're free to explore the grounds during daylight hours. The library is open to you, as are the gardens. There's a conservatory on the east side that's particularly lovely. Someone will come for you at sunset." She left and Tessa ate slowly, processing this new information. Humans working alongside vampires, knowing the truth, apparently content with the arrangement. It complicated the simple monster narrative she'd been unconsciously constructing. After breakfast, Tessa dressed in jeans and a sweater from the wardrobe and ventured into the hallway. The mansion was quiet, sunlit, beautiful. She found her way back to the library and spent the morning exploring its shelves. Many of the books were in languages she didn't recognize, but there was an entire section devoted to vampire history and lore, written in English. She pulled down a leather-bound volume titled The Nosferatu Chronicles, a documented history, and settled by the window. The book was dense, scholarly, filled with dates and lineages and political treaties. But it painted a picture of a society far older and more complex than she'd imagined. Vampires weren't undead corpses or soulless demons. They were a separate species that had evolved alongside humanity, long-lived and powerful, with their own cultures and codes of honor. According to the text, vampires organized themselves into territorial kingdoms overseen by royal bloodlines. The strongest vampires could trace their lineage back thousands of years. They'd established laws governing interaction with humans, strict rules about feeding and transformation. Breaking these laws brought swift, brutal punishment from the ruling class. Tessa found a chapter on the North American territories and discovered that Vladislav's full title was Vladislav Dragon, Blood King of the Northern Throne, descendant of the dragon line dating back to the Carpathian Mountains of ancient Romania. He'd held the North American territories for 200 years, maintaining peace through a combination of strength, strategy, and absolute enforcement of the old laws. 200 years. He was at least that old, possibly much older, and he'd risk political complications to save her life. The sun was sinking toward the horizon when Elena found her in the library. "Sunset approaches, Miss Thornton. Lord Vladislav requests your presence in the main hall." Tessa closed the book and followed, her heart rate picking up. The mansion was beginning to stir, shadows in the hallways coalescing into pale figures who nodded politely as she passed. By the time she reached the main hall, it was full dark outside, and the chandelier blazed like a captured sun. Vladislav stood at the center of the hall, deep in conversation with Lucian and another vampire she didn't recognize. He'd changed clothes, now wore all black tailored pants, a shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows revealing forearms corded with muscle. His white hair was pulled back from his face, emphasizing those sharp, inhumanly perfect features. He looked up as she approached, and his expression softened. "Tessa, you rested well, I hope?" "I did. Thank you for your hospitality." She felt absurdly formal, but what was the proper etiquette when addressing a vampire king? "Walk with me." He offered his arm, and after a moment's hesitation, she took it. His skin was cool through the fabric of his shirt, but not unpleasantly so. He guided her out of the hall through a side door onto a terrace that overlooked the gardens. The night air was crisp but not as brutal as the mountain pass had been. Lanterns lit the garden paths, and Tessa could see other vampires moving among the hedges, their pale skin and hair glowing in the artificial light. "Have you given thought to your choice?" Vladislav asked. "I've been reading about your world all day," Tessa admitted. "It's overwhelming, beautiful and terrifying in equal measure, an apt description." He led her down stone steps into the garden proper. "I should tell you that the conclave ends in 3 days. After that, the visiting vampires will return to their own territories, and the estate will be quieter. Less overwhelming, perhaps." "What is the conclave exactly?" "A gathering of the territorial kings and queens, held every decade to address grievances, negotiate treaties, and maintain the peace. Think of it as our version of a United Nations assembly, but with considerably older participants and much better wine." His tone was dry, almost amused. Tessa found herself smiling despite everything. "And you're hosting this year?" "An honor and a burden. My territories are stable, prosperous. It makes me a neutral party, which is essential when mediating disputes between rulers who've nursed grudges for centuries." He paused by a fountain, its water frozen into elaborate ice sculptures. "But it also means I'm responsible for everyone's safety and satisfaction. Bringing a human into the estate during conclave has created complications." "I'm sorry," Tessa said automatically. "I didn't mean to cause trouble." "You didn't cause anything. Those wolves created the situation," I merely responded. Vladislav turned to face her fully. "But I need you to understand the dynamics at play. There are vampires here who view humans as inferior, useful only for blood and menial labor. Others see you as potential equals, deserving of respect and autonomy. My enforcement of laws protecting humans has made enemies among the more conservative factions. So having me here weakens your political position. Having you here reaffirms my commitment to the laws I've sworn to uphold. Which some will view as weakness, yes, but others will see strength." His red eyes searched hers. "I won't allow anyone to harm you, Tessa. You have my word, my protection, for as long as you remain under this roof." The intensity of his gaze made her breath catch. "Why? You don't know me. I'm just some random human who happened to break down on the wrong road. You're a person who was in danger and I had the power to help. That's reason enough." But something in his expression suggested there was more he wasn't saying. "Besides, you interest me. You didn't faint or scream when I revealed what I am. You've spent the day educating yourself rather than cowering or demanding to leave. You have courage and intelligence, admirable qualities." Tessa felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I grew up on stories about monsters and heroes. Maybe I've just read too much fantasy fiction. Or perhaps you understand instinctively that the world is larger and stranger than most humans allow themselves to believe." He started walking again, guiding her deeper into the garden. "Tell me about yourself, Tessa Thornton. What were you doing on that mountain road?" "Driving home from a conference in Seattle," she said. "I'm a botanical researcher, specializing in cold weather plant adaptation. The conference ran late and I decided to drive through the night rather than pay for another hotel. Stupid decision, not stupid, unfortunate." He sounded genuinely interested. "Botanical research. You study how plants survive in harsh conditions? How they thrive in them, actually. It's not just survival. Some species have evolved to need the cold, to require winter dormancy. Without it, they fail." She wasn't sure why she was opening up to him, But something about walking through the frozen garden with a vampire king made the conversation feel surreal enough to be safe. I've always been fascinated by resilience, by the way life finds purchase in impossible places. Vladislav was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was soft, a fitting study for someone who's found herself in an impossible situation and refuses to break. They'd reached the far end of the garden, where a stone gazebo offered a view of the mountains beyond the estate walls. Vladislav leaned against the railing, his profile sharp against the star-filled sky. "I was turned in 1754, he said abruptly, "in the Carpathian Mountains where my family had ruled for generations. A rival vampire lord attacked our holdings, slaughtered my people. I was 26 years old, dying from a poisoned blade. My sire found me and offered a choice, death or transformation. I chose to live, to become strong enough to reclaim what was taken." Tessa moved to stand beside him. "Did you reclaim it?" "Eventually. It took 50 years, but I hunted down everyone responsible and delivered justice. Then I left Europe, came to the New World seeking something beyond vengeance." His hands gripped the railing, knuckles white. "I've spent 2 centuries building a kingdom based on honor and law rather than fear and cruelty, proving that vampires can be more than the monsters humans name us. Is that why you saved me? To prove you're not a monster?" He turned to her, and the expression on his face was raw, vulnerable. "I saved you because the thought of those wolves tearing you apart made me feel something I haven't felt in longer than I care to remember. Protective, possessive, human." The air between them seemed to thicken. Tessa's pulse was suddenly loud in her ears, and she knew he could hear it, could probably smell the flush of blood under her skin. "You barely know me. I know you were brave enough to shout at wolves 3 times your size. I know you're curious enough to spend a day reading dusty histories rather than demanding escape. I know that when I held you last night you felt right in my arms." He reached out, his fingers ghosting along her jaw. "And I know I should walk away because you're human and temporary, and I'm neither of those things. But I find I don't want to." Tessa should step back. This was insane. He was a vampire, a king, a creature who'd lived through centuries. She was a botanist from Montana who still had student loans. But his touch was gentle despite his obvious strength, and his eyes held a loneliness that echoed something in her own chest. "I don't want you to walk away," she whispered. He closed the distance between them slowly, giving her every opportunity to retreat. When she didn't, he cupped her face in both hands and kissed her. His lips were cool, firm, perfect. The kiss started gentle, questioning, and when Tessa responded, sliding her hands up his chest to grip his shoulders, it deepened into something that made her knees weak. He kissed like he had all the time in the world, like she was precious and rare, and it pulled something loose in her chest that had been locked tight for longer than she'd realized. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Vladislav rested his forehead against hers. "This is unwise, probably," Tessa agreed. "Are you going to stop?" "No." He sounded almost angry, but not at her. At himself maybe, or at the situation. "I should, but I won't. Not unless you tell me to. I won't." They stood there in the gazebo for a long time, wrapped in each other, while frost formed patterns on the stone around them and the stars wheeled overhead. Finally, Vladislav stirred. "I need to return to the conclave. There's a session tonight that I must attend." But tomorrow he hesitated. "Tomorrow I'd like to show you something if you're willing. Something few humans ever see." "What is it?" "A surprise. Trust me?" Tessa thought about wolves and car crashes and impossible rescues, about a vampire king who read loneliness in her eyes because he carried the same burden. "Yes, I trust you." His smile was radiant, transforming his face from austere beauty to something heartbreakingly young. For a moment, she could see the 26-year-old man he'd been before vampirism froze him in time. He walked her back to the mansion, his hand warm around hers despite his natural coldness. At the base of the grand staircase, he lifted her hand to his lips and pressed a kiss to her knuckles. "Sleep well, Tessa. I'll come for you at sunset tomorrow." She went to her room in a daze, her lips still tingling from their kiss, her mind spinning. This was crazy. She barely knew him, but somehow that didn't seem to matter. Something had sparked between them on that frozen road, and the flames were building into something that felt inevitable. The next day crawled past with agonizing slowness. Tessa tried to read, tried to explore more of the estate, but her thoughts kept circling back to Vladislav. To the way he'd looked at her, touched her, kissed her. To the vulnerability in his voice when he'd admitted she made him feel human. Elena brought her meals and tried to engage her in conversation, but Tessa was too distracted to be good company. By the time the sun began its descent, she was pacing her room, checking her reflection in the mirror for the 10th time, wondering if she should have worn the dress instead of the nice pants and blouse. The knock came precisely at sunset. She opened the door to find Vladislav dressed in dark slacks and a deep blue shirt that somehow made his eyes look even more intense. He offered his hand. Ready? For the surprise? Yes. He led her through the mansion, down corridors she hadn't explored, to a door that looked like plain wood but was reinforced with steel. He pressed his palm to a panel beside it, and locks disengaged with heavy clicks. The door swung open onto a stone staircase leading down into darkness. What's down there? Tessa asked. The heart of the estate. Where we truly live. Vladislav descended the stairs, and after a moment, Tessa followed. The staircase spiraled down for what felt like several stories, lit by crystalline lights set into the walls. At the bottom, another door opened onto a vast underground complex that stole Tessa's breath. It was a city. Not a single building, but a network of structures carved from living stone, connected by bridges and walkways, all of it illuminated by lights that shifted through colors like the aurora borealis. Gothic architecture soared overhead, arches and spires and delicate stonework that looked like frozen lace. Water ran in channels through the space, feeding pools and fountains. Gardens of cave-dwelling plants grew in careful arrangements. And everywhere vampires. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands, moving through the underground city with purpose. They dressed in everything from medieval robes to modern suits, spoke in a dozen languages, conducted business in market stalls and elegant shops. This is the Undercroft, Vladislav said quietly. The vampire realm that exists beneath the human world. Every major city has one, connected by tunnels that span continents. This is where we gather, trade, socialize, live our true lives away from the sun. Tessa turned in a slow circle, trying to take it all in. It's incredible, beautiful. I wanted you to see it. To understand that we're not just monsters hiding in the dark. We have culture, art, commerce, families. We've built a civilization that parallels yours, touching it in places but remaining separate. He gestured to a bridge. Come. There's more. He took her through the Undercroft, pointing out landmarks. A library that put the upstairs collection to shame, its shelves climbing into shadows. A theater where vampires performed works written before Shakespeare was born. Markets selling everything from rare books to vials of blood to exquisite artwork. A training ground where warriors sparred with speed and grace that blurred the line between combat and dance. Vampires noticed them passing, and Tessa couldn't miss the reactions. Some looked curious, others disapproving, but all of them bowed slightly when they recognized Vladislav. He acknowledged each gesture with a nod but didn't stop to speak to anyone. Finally, they reached a structure at the Undercroft's center, a palace carved from black stone veined with silver. Guards flanked the entrance, both dropping to one knee as Vladislav approached. My lord, they said in unison. I'm showing our guests the throne room, Vladislav said. We're not to be disturbed. They entered a hall that made Tessa think of cathedrals, all soaring ceilings and intricate stonework. At the far end, raised on a dais, sat a throne carved from a single piece of obsidian. It was simple in design but radiating power, like the room had been built around it. Vladislav climbed the dais and sat, looking every inch the king. For 200 years I've sat here and made decisions that affected thousands of lives. Judged criminals, mediated disputes, sent warriors to war and welcomed them home. He met her eyes. It's a heavy weight. And in all that time I've never brought anyone into this room who wasn't vampire or bound in servitude. Tessa climbed the steps slowly. Why bring me now? Because you asked me last night if I was going to stop pursuing this connection between us. And I realized that if I wanted you to understand what you might be choosing me, choosing this world, I needed to show you all of it. The beauty and the burden. She reached the throne, stood before it. This doesn't scare me. Perhaps it should. But he reached out and pulled her gently onto his lap, arranging her so she was cradled against his chest. You'd be giving up the sunlight, Tessa. If you chose transformation, if we pursued this to its natural conclusion, you'd have to leave behind everything you know. Maybe, or maybe I'd be gaining something richer. She touched his face, traced the sharp line of his jaw. You said I make you feel human. You make me feel alive in a way I haven't in years, like I've been sleepwalking through my life and suddenly woke up. He kissed her then, deep and claiming, and Tessa poured herself into it. This was crazy, it was too fast. It violated every reasonable principle she'd ever lived by. But it felt more right than anything she'd ever done. A cough from the doorway broke them apart. Lucien stood at the entrance to the throne room, his expression carefully neutral. Apologies, my lord. But the conclave session is beginning, and your presence is required. There's been an incident. Vladislav's expression hardened. What kind of incident? The kind that requires the king's immediate attention. He cursed softly in a language Tessa didn't recognize, then gently set her on her feet. I'm sorry. I have to deal with this, I understand. Go, Lucien will escort you back upstairs. Don't wander the Undercroft alone, not all vampires respect humans as I do. He squeezed her hand. I'll find you when this is finished. Tessa let Lucien guide her back through the underground city, up the long staircase into the mansion proper. He left her at her room with a slight bow. He cares for you, Lucien said abruptly. I've served Vladislav for 70 years, and I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you. Whatever you decide about your future, know that you've given him something precious, hope that he can be more than his crown. Before Tessa could respond, he was gone, moving with that unnatural vampire speed. She entered her room and sank onto the bed, her mind whirling. Everything was happening so fast. A few days ago, she'd been driving through the mountains thinking about protein sequences and grant applications. Now she was falling for a vampire king and contemplating giving up humanity. Hours passed. Tessa tried to sleep but couldn't settle. Finally, near midnight, her door crashed open. Vladislav stood in the doorway and something was wrong. His shirt was torn, splattered with blood, his eyes wild. Behind him she could hear shouting, the clash of metal. We need to leave, he said. Now what's happening? Betrayal. Ambush. The conservative faction used the conclave as cover to stage a coup. He crossed to her, gripped her shoulders. They know about you, know I've been protecting you. You're a target now, leverage they can use against me. Fear spiked through her. Can't you fight them? I am fighting them, but there are dozens of them, ancient vampires with private armies. I need to get you somewhere safe before they breach the mansion. He pulled her toward the door. There's a car waiting. Lucien will drive you to a safe house in the city. What about you? I'll hold them here, buy you time to escape. He cupped her face and his expression was anguished. I'm sorry, Tessa. I brought you into this, put you in danger. Stop apologizing and kiss me. He did, fierce and desperate, and Tessa tasted blood on his lips, not hers. When they broke apart, she gripped his shirt. Don't die, that's an order. His laugh was broken. Yes, my lady. They ran through the mansion, Vladislav moving at human speed to match her pace. Behind them, the sounds of battle grew louder, screams, crashes, the roar of something that sounded like fire. They burst through a side door into the garden, and Lucien was there with a black car, engine running. Get her out of here, Vladislav commanded. Take the northern route, don't stop for anything. My lord, Lucien started. That's an order. Lucien bowed. Vladislav pushed Tessa toward the car, but before she could get in, an explosion rocked the mansion. The west wing erupted in flames and vampires poured out of the breach, warriors in black armor, their eyes glowing with bloodlust. Go! Vladislav turned to face the attackers and Tessa saw him transform. His fingers elongated into claws, his fangs extending to lethal points. He became something between beautiful and terrible, power radiating from him like heat. Lucien grabbed Tessa and shoved her into the car. She pressed her face to the window as they peeled away, watching Vladislav meet the first wave of attackers. He moved like death incarnate, tearing through them with brutal efficiency. But there were so many. The car raced through the gates and onto the mountain road. Lucien drove with supernatural precision, taking curves at speeds that should have sent them careening into the ravine. Behind them, the mansion burned. Will he survive? Tessa asked, her voice breaking. Lord Vladislav is the strongest vampire I've ever known, Lucien said. If anyone can weather this betrayal, it's him. But it will be bloody. Many will die tonight. They drove for 2 hours before Lucien finally slowed, pulling off the highway onto a side road that led to what looked like an abandoned warehouse. He parked inside and turned to face Tessa. This is a safe house maintained by vampires loyal to Vladislav. You'll be protected here. I need to return to the estate, help him fight. Let me come with you, Tessa said. I can't just hide while he's in danger. You'd be a liability in that fight. The kindest thing you can do for him is stay alive, stay safe. Don't give his enemies ammunition to use against him. Lucien's expression softened. He cares for you, Tessa Thornton. More than is wise, perhaps. Give him something to survive for. He left before she could argue further. The warehouse was cold, empty except for basic supplies and a cot in the corner. Tessa wrapped herself in blankets and waited, counting the seconds, praying to a god she wasn't sure she believed in that Vladislav would survive. Dawn came and went. The day stretched interminably. Tessa paced, tried to sleep, failed. Every sound made her jump, certain it was enemies come to finish what they'd started. Dusk arrived and with it, a sound outside the warehouse. Tessa grabbed a crowbar from the supply shelf and pressed herself against the wall. Her heart hammering, the door opened. Vladislav limped inside, covered in blood and ash, his clothes in tatters. But he was alive. Tessa dropped the crowbar and ran to him. He caught her, held her tight enough to hurt, his face buried in her hair. You're alive, she breathed. Thank God. It's over, he said, his voice rough. The traitors are dead or fled. The conclave is dissolved, and he pulled back to look at her, his red eyes searching. I spent every moment of that battle thinking about you, about getting back to you. It made me strong and reckless and stupid, and I don't care. I was terrified, Tessa admitted. Lucien said you were strong, but I couldn't stop thinking about you bleeding, dying. He kissed her to stop the words, and this kiss was different from the others. Claiming yes, but also grateful, worshipful, like she was air and he'd been drowning. I need to ask you something, Vladislav said when they finally broke apart. And I need you to answer honestly, without feeling pressured by what we've been through. Okay. He took her hands, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. The choice I spoke of before about joining our world, I'm asking you now to make it. Not because I'm the king or because you owe me anything, but because I'm falling for you, Tessa, hard and fast and against all wisdom. And I need to know if you feel the same, if you'd consider staying. Not as a servant or a temporary liaison, but as my partner, my equal. Tessa's heart felt too large for her chest. Are you asking me to be your queen? Eventually, if you wanted that title. But first I'm asking you to be mine. To let me court you properly, show you everything my world has to offer. To give us time to see if this connection is as real and deep as it feels. His voice dropped. I'm 272 years old, and I've never felt this way about anyone. You're sharp and brave and beautiful, and you see me not the king or the monster, but the man beneath it all. I don't want to lose that. I don't want to lose you. She could barely see him through the tears blurring her vision. I'm falling for you too. I know it's crazy, I know it's too fast, but I can't deny it. When I thought you might die, I felt like something vital was being torn out of me. And yes, I want to stay. I want to see where this leads. His smile was radiant. You'll have to give up daylight eventually, if you choose transformation. Give up your old life, your work in the sun. Plants grow in darkness too, Tessa said. I'll adapt. I'm good at that. He laughed and it sounded like joy. Then we'll take this slow. I'll teach you our ways. Introduce you properly to vampire society. When you're ready, if you're ready, we'll discuss transformation. But there's no rush. I have eternity, and I want to spend it earning your love. You're already halfway there. They stayed in the warehouse until full dark, talking and planning and stealing kisses. When Vladislav was confident it was safe, he drove them back to the estate. The mansion had been badly damaged but not destroyed. Vampires swarmed over it, already beginning repairs. Katerina met them at the entrance, relief flooding her face when she saw Vladislav. The casualties, he asked. 17 dead on our side. 38 of the traitors eliminated, 12 captured, the rest fled into the mountains. I see you kept our human safe. She's not our human, Vladislav said firmly. She's Tessa and she's under my personal protection. Anyone who harms or disrespects her answers to me directly. Katerina's eyebrows rose, but she nodded. Understood, my lord. Word spread quickly. By the next evening, every vampire in the estate knew that their king had claimed a human as his intended consort. The reactions were mixed, some supportive, others scandalized, but none openly defied Vladislav's decree. Tessa spent the following weeks learning vampire customs and history, guided by Katerina and Lucia. She attended council meetings at Vladislav's side, silent but observant, learning the intricate politics that governed the night. She explored the undercroft more thoroughly, made tentative friends among the vampires who accepted her presence, and she fell deeper in love with Vladislav every day. He courted her with old-world elegance, flowers from gardens that only bloomed in darkness, books from his personal collection, long walks through the frozen estate grounds where they talked about everything and nothing. He introduced her to vampire art and music, some of it predating human civilization. He sparred with her in the training grounds, teaching her basic self-defense. Delighted when she managed to land a hit through sheer determination. On moonlit nights they would sit in the gazebo where they'd first kissed, and he would tell her stories of his long life, the wars he'd fought, the places he'd seen, the slow evolution of his worldview from vengeful warlord to something approaching wisdom. I was angry for so long, he admitted one night, his head in her lap while she ran her fingers through his white hair. Angry at the vampire who turned me without permission, angry at the enemies who'd destroyed my human family, angry at the world for being cruel. It took me a century to realize that anger was a cage. What freed you? Tessa asked. Time, perspective, and the realization that I could choose what kind of immortal I wanted to be. I couldn't change the past, but I could shape the future. He caught her hand and kissed her palm. You've reminded me why I made that choice. Why protecting the vulnerable and upholding justice matters. You've given me purpose beyond mere survival. You've given me adventure, Tessa countered. A whole new world to explore, and love I never expected to find. 3 months after the attack, Vladislav asked her to make her final choice about transformation. They stood in the throne room, alone, the obsidian seat glinting in the ethereal light. "I won't lie to you about what it involves," he said seriously. "The transformation is painful. You'll die. In a sense, your human body will give way to something new. You'll lose the ability to walk in sunlight, to eat human food, to age. You'll need blood to survive, though we can manage that ethically through willing donors or blood banks. And you'll carry the weight of immortality, watching human friends and family age and die while you remain unchanged." "But I'd have you," Tessa said, "for as long as you wanted me. Then I'm ready." She'd given this decision months of thought, weighed every consequence. Her human life had been satisfying but solitary, focused on work to the exclusion of deep connection. Here in the vampire world she'd found belonging, found love, found a place where her curiosity and courage were assets rather than oddities. "Turn me, Vladislav. Make me yours in every sense." He cupped her face, his expression awed. "Are you certain? Once done, there's no reversal." "I've never been more certain of anything." He kissed her deeply, then pulled back. "It needs to be done properly with witnesses. We'll hold a ceremony tomorrow night in the Undercroft. I want the entire vampire nation to witness you choosing this, choosing us, choosing me." The ceremony was held in the great hall at the Undercroft's heart, attended by hundreds of vampires. Tessa wore a gown of deep crimson, provided by Katerina, her hair arranged in an elaborate style that would have been at home in a medieval court. Vladislav stood at the center of the hall in formal robes, every inch the king. When Tessa entered, the crowd parted to let her through, and she walked to him with her head high. "Tessa Thornton," he said, his voice carrying through the vast space. "You have chosen to join the Nosferatu, to become one of us through transformation. Do you understand that this choice is permanent and binding?" "I do," she said clearly. "Do you understand that you will leave behind the human world, its comforts and limitations, to embrace immortality with all its blessings and burdens?" "I do." "Then I, Vladislav Dragon, Blood King of the Northern Throne, claim you as my consort and intended mate. I offer you my blood, my strength, my eternal protection. Will you accept?" "I will." He extended his hand and she took it. He drew her close and tilted her head, exposing her throat. The crowd fell silent. "This will hurt," he whispered, "only for her. But I'll be with you through all of it. I promise. I trust you." His fangs pierced her throat, sharp and swift. The pain was intense but brief, replaced by a strange floating sensation as he drank. Tessa's vision dimmed, her body going limp in his arms. Just before unconsciousness took her, she felt him bite his own wrist and press it to her lips. "Drink," he commanded. She did, and his blood was liquid fire burning through her veins, rewriting her cells. The last thing she heard before darkness claimed her was his voice, soft and loving. "Come back to me." The transformation took 3 nights. Tessa drifted in and out of consciousness, her body warring with itself as it died and reformed. She felt Vladislav beside her constantly, his cool hand in hers, his voice talking her through the pain. When she finally woke fully, the world had changed. Everything was sharper, clearer. She could hear conversations happening floors away, smell individual scents in the air: blood, stone, old paper, snow. Her body felt powerful, coiled with strength she'd never possessed. And when she looked at Vladislav sitting beside the bed watching her with red eyes full of relief, she could see him in perfect detail, every eyelash, every subtle shift of expression. "How do you feel?" he asked. Tessa sat up, testing her new body. Strong, alive, different. She looked at her hands, noting how pale they'd become. When she found a mirror, she saw that her hair had lightened several shades, not white like the older vampires, but a silver blonde that shimmered. Her eyes were still brown but brighter, more intense. "I'm beautiful. You were always beautiful. Now you're immortal." She turned back to him and saw him truly for the first time, not just his physical form but the aura of power surrounding him, the weight of centuries in his gaze. And she felt the bond between them, a golden thread connecting their souls. "I can feel you," she whispered. "In my chest, my mind, like you're part of me," the mating bond. It forms when a vampire transforms their chosen partner. He rose and crossed to her, pulling her into his arms. "You're mine now, in all ways, and I'm yours." Tessa kissed him, and with her new vampire senses it was overwhelming: the taste of him, the coolness of his skin, the way their bodies fit together perfectly. When they broke apart, she was dizzy with sensation and emotion. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now, I teach you to hunt, to fight, to navigate immortal society now. We formally announce our mating to the vampire nation and solidify the political alliances it creates. Now, we build a life together that spans centuries." He brushed a strand of silver hair from her face. "And eventually, when you're ready, we hold a coronation. You'll be queen, my partner in ruling the North American territories. That's a lot of responsibility. You'll be magnificent at it. You already are." He took her hand and led her to the window, pulling back the curtains to reveal the night sky. You can't see the sun anymore, Tessa, but the moon and stars are yours, the darkness is yours, and I am yours for as long as eternity lasts. She leaned into him, feeling the strength of his embrace, the certainty of their bond. Then I'd say I made the right choice. The coronation took place 6 months later, after Tessa had mastered the basics of vampire life and proven herself to the court. She stood before the obsidian throne wearing a crown of silver and diamonds, the assembled nobility of the vampire world bearing witness. Vladislav placed the crown on her head himself, his eyes shining with pride and love. I present to you Tessa Thornton Dragon, Blood Queen of the Northern Throne, my consort and equal in all things. The crowd erupted in applause, not universal approval perhaps, but acknowledgement of the power their union represented. A human who'd chosen to become vampire, who'd earned her place through courage rather than birthright. She was a symbol of the bridge between worlds that Vladislav had spent centuries building. Afterward, they stood together on the balcony of the Undercroft Palace, looking out over the vast underground city that was now as much her home as his. Any regrets? Vladislav asked, his arm around her waist. Tessa thought about sunlight, about her old life, about the career she'd left behind. Then she thought about eternity with the man she loved, about the adventures still to come, about the good they could do together. Not a single one, she said, and meant it. He kissed her as the crowd below celebrated, and Tessa knew that this was just the beginning. They had centuries ahead of them, challenges to face, enemies to defeat, triumphs to celebrate. But they'd face all of it together, bound by love that had started on a frozen road and grown into something that would outlast empires. In the years that followed, they became legends among vampires and humans alike. The king who'd chosen love over politics, and the human who'd chosen immortality for the same reason. They ruled with wisdom and strength, navigating the complex relationship between their world and humanity with grace. Tessa established programs to protect vulnerable humans from rogue vampires, creating safe houses and education initiatives. She used her scientific background to research vampire biology, helping their kind understand themselves better. She became a beloved figure, respected for her intelligence and compassion. Vladislav, for his part, seemed to grow younger in spirit with each passing year. Having Tessa at his side gave him renewed purpose, softened some of the hardness that centuries of ruling had created. They were partners in the truest sense, balancing each other, supporting each other, loving each other through triumphs and trials. On the anniversary of their mating, they would return to that gazebo in the garden where they'd first kissed. The fountain still stood, its water freezing each winter into elaborate sculptures. They'd hold each other and remember the wolves, the fear, the impossible rescue that had led to everything that came after. I think about that night often, Tessa said one anniversary, snow falling softly around them. How I could have died a dozen different ways. How unlikely it was that you'd be there exactly when I needed you. Fate, Vladislav said simply. It had to be. The odds were too astronomical for anything else. Do you believe in fate? I didn't. But then I found you dying on a frozen road and I couldn't walk away. My heart wouldn't let me. So yes, I believe some things are meant to be. He tilted her chin up, his red eyes soft in the lantern light. You were meant to be mine and I was meant to be yours. Everything else was just the universe conspiring to bring us together. Tessa smiled and kissed him, still marveling that she got to do this forever. That on the worst night of her human life, she'd found the greatest gift, love that transcended mortality. A partner who challenged and cherished her in equal measure. A home in the darkness that felt more like belonging than anywhere she'd lived in the sun. They stayed in the gazebo until dawn approached, talking and laughing and planning their next century together. Then they retreated into the mansion, into their chambers, into each other's arms as the sun rose over a world Tessa no longer needed but would always protect, because that was what love meant, she'd learned. Not possession or obsession, but partnership and purpose. Building something together that was greater than either of them alone. Creating light in the darkness, hope in immortality, humanity in the heart of monsters. The wolves had cornered her on a frozen road, true, but the vampire king's cold arms had lifted her into warmth, into love, into forever, and that made all the difference.